Hello everyone, and welcome to section 1 of the Beach Walk Blanket video tutorials. As you can see, what we have here are the 9 squares which form the centre of the blanket, and my task today will be to show you how to make one of these squares. Once you've got the basic knowledge of making a granny square, you'll be able to go on and complete the other 8. Now, this is square number 1. This is the first one you will be joining when you come to do your join as you go. So I thought, well, we'll just start with the first one. I'm working with 4 different colours, and there's a colour change for each round. There are 4 rounds in this square. Now, just before we start, let me explain that my method of making a granny square involves turning it over after each round. And the reason I do that is because it keeps the square nice and straight. If there's too much tension in one direction, so that if you work the entire 4 rounds on the same side, there is a tendency to pull the square out of shape, and it goes a bit like that. So we want to keep the square nice and straight with good right angles, and that's why turning it after each round balances the tension in the square. I'm working with a 4mm hook, and of course the yarn I'm using is a double knit weight. I'm going to be talking you through this tutorial in UK crochet terms, but it's fairly easy to adapt that to the US terms, because this is all done in UK treble crochet. So I'm using treble crochet and chain stitches. These are the only stitches that I'm using for this granny square. So in US terms, chain stitch is the same, and the treble crochet in US terms is double crochet. So just bear that in. Let's start with the hint of silver. Now you're going to start by making a circle, which you will then work into. And there are various ways of making a circle to start, and my method is to chain 4. So I'm going to make a slip knot. First, put it on my hook. That doesn't count as a chain stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1, 2, 3 and 4. So you have a little bit of a tail of chain stitches. And then all you need to do to make it into a circle is to find that very first chain you made and put your hook into it, pull through the yarn through it and the last loop that's on your hook. And what's happened is that you've joined that little tail of 4 chains into a circle. Now, the hole can sometimes be a little bit difficult to see in the circle to start with. It opens up very easily once you've got a few stitches in it. And don't be tempted to use this, what looks like a space, but that's not the centre. It's this one right in the centre that you're going to be working into. We're going to be making blocks of 3 treble crochet stitches separated by 2 chains. But for the very first block, we're going to chain 2. Now that chain 2 is going to substitute for the very first treble crochet stitch. And some people will chain 3. My preference is to chain 2. So that's me done my first stitch. It's 2 chains, but it should be classed as a treble crochet. And then I'm going to put my yarn over, go into that center hole, grab the yarn and pull it through. And there are 3 loops sitting on the hook. And then I'm going to yarn over again, pull my hook through the first 2 loops, yarn over and pull it through the second 2, and that's a treble crochet stitch, or in US terms a double crochet. So now I've got my chain 2 and 1 treble, and I want to make one more treble stitch into that center space. So again, it's yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And that's my first cluster of stitches in the first, that's the first side of my round 1 of granny square. And then chain 2 and 3 trebles going into the center once more. And you'll see once I've done these 3 trebles that the chain 2 that I've just put in before them forms the corner of the square. So you can actually see that corner. Let's see if I can hold that up a bit. You can see the corner forming. So I want to chain 2 again to form the next corner, and then 1, 2, 3 trebles, chain 2, and 1, 2, 3 trebles, and chain 2. Now let's have a look and see what we've done. For a square, you'll know that a square has 4 sides, so we need 4 groups of 3 trebles, and you can see that I've done that, and it's looking quite a little bit of a rounded square, but it is a square. So we're finished with this row now. All we need to do is look for that very first chain 2 that we started with, which is the first stitch, and we're going to put the hook into the top of those 2 chains. Try very hard to pick up 2 loops so that it doesn't go a bit loose, and pull your yarn through and also through the loop on your hook, and that just ties the whole thing together. So we can finish off this yarn now because we're ready to start round 2. And what you just need to do is pull it through and pull it tight. And that's round 1 of the granny square. The hole in the middle is opened up with putting all these stitches in, but that will be pulled and tightened when you come to sew in your ends. If I pull that just now nice and firmly, you can see that it closes up, and it will close up more when you sew in the ends. I'm going to leave the ends just now until I've done the square, and it's very, very important, in my opinion, that you tidy up the ends of each square as you do it so that you don't have a lot to do at once. So there is my first round, and before I start my second round, I'm going to turn it over onto its reverse side and take my next colour. And this is the duck egg. So what we want to do is look for a corner where the chain 2 has formed a corner, and there's a nice space below the chain 2. Put your hook in and attach your yarn. Again, there are various ways people attach yarn, and various tutorials will tell you different ways. This is my way, which I learned when I first started to crochet, and I just keep doing it. So what I do is I just put my hook in, pull up a loop and pull it through, and then I put both lengths of the yarn over my hook and pull them through so that there are 2 loops on my hook, but I don't really need these 2 loops, so I just need to find the one that's got the short end and pull it out. And that's me ready to start. I've got a slip stitch already in place. So I'm going to chain 2, which is the very first treble crochet stitch, and then I'm going to put a treble crochet into the same space, and second treble crochet, and that is my first cluster, chain 2 and 2 treble crochets, and then yarn over again and go straight over. I don't put any chains in between my clusters, so I'm just yarning over and going straight over to the next corner, and I'm going to make 1 2 and 3 trebles. So that's another granny cluster. But I want to make a corner, so I'm going to chain 2 and then put 3 more trebles into that same space. And there you can see what the corner is looking like. Again, into the next space and 3 trebles. So that's 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and 1, 2, and 3. And I just need to go round my square. I've got another cluster of a corner cluster of 3 trebles, chain 2, 3 trebles, and then we have to finish off that corner where we started. So I'll just do that. So that's 1, oops, my yarn's not behaving. 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and 1, 2, 3. So that was the corner before the one that we started with. Now when you look at this, you can see that the one that we started with is only half done. It's got 3 stitches in it, but it still needs another 3 and a chain 2 to form the corner. So we're just going to make that just now with 1, 2, 3 trebles in that last or first corner space, chain 2, and then again we want to find the top of the first chain 2 that you made, put your hook in, pick up 2 loops and pull it through and pull it through. And that is round 2. So rounds 3 and 4 just work in exactly the same way. Again, turn your square over to the reverse side, and the round 3 is done with the warm grey. Now I'm going to start it because there's just something slightly different to the last round. So I'll start this again. I'll make my slip stitch or slip knot to attach the yarn. And I'm going to chain 2. Notice that I tend to avoid starting and stopping in the same corner every time. So I've moved, it doesn't really matter which one, but I move away from the one where I've just finished off. Again, that helps to keep the square balanced. So I've chained my 2 and I'm going to put in my 2 treble crochets in the first half of that corner. Now in round 2, we just went straight over to the next corner, but we are growing by 1 space each round that we do. So we now have a space in the middle, and all you need to do there is to put in 1, 2, 3 treble stitches. And you can see that's giving you a nice straight edge. I'm along to the corner, 1, 2, 3, and chain 2, and 1, 2, 3. And there you can see how it's forming. So what I'm going to do is work all the way round, and I'll come back when we are ready to finish off round 3 and start round 4 rounds of the granny square are now complete, and the side that we're going to be joining to the blanket, so therefore the side which will be uppermost is the side where my last round is on its reverse. That was the way I finished it off, but just remember that when you're making the rounds, you turn it over after each round. So I've turned it over, and this is the side that will be on the front of the blanket. And therefore, I prefer to sew my ends in on the other side. So there are 1 or 2 stragglers on this front side. So I'm going to just pull them through. Just take my hook and grab them and pull them through to the back. And then we can start. So turn them over. This is now what we consider the wrong side. And I'm going to start with the tail that actually has come from the very center. This was the tail that we started with. So I'm going to thread that onto my needle, and believe me, there are some people who find it even difficult to thread a needle, especially with this thick yarn. You know, you can try doing this and nothing happens. It all gets a bit bunchy and it won't go through. So what to do is to bend it over your needle, pull the needle out, and then you've got it sandwiched very firmly between your thumb and forefinger, and you can see how tight I'm pushing that together because my fingers have turned pale, but that holds that very firmly. And then all you need to do is put your needle on top and just push it down, and your yarn comes through neatly. There you go. So the very first tail that we're going to sew in, we want to sew in really firmly so that it closes up this hole and keeps it closed up. It's not going to pop open again. So I'm going to thread my needle through the stitches on the back. I'm not going through, I'm just going through the middle of these stitches so that the needle doesn't appear on the front of the square. I'm not pulling tight at this stage. I'm just working around the perimeter of that center circle with my wool and back to where I started it. You don't have to count anything. It's all very roughly done. And at this point, you can now pull it tight, and you can see just how tight that center can become. And I can guarantee you it is just as tight as if you had made a magic ring or a magic circle to start with. I don't prefer that method, so I don't show you how to do it. But some people do because they feel it closes the center hole up more tightly, but I don't think you could get it closed any more tightly than that. If you left it at that and cut it, the yarn would probably loosen and things would open up again. So I've gone all the way around in one direction, and I'm going to go back in the opposite direction now. And that just gives you a bit of security to know that your yarn is less likely to pull out. And personally, I don't mind doing another little bit just to be absolutely certain. And that's I kind of pick up a back stitch. And I'm going back in the other direction again. Pick up a little back stitch and put my needle underneath again, and another little back stitch. And that way, everything is nice and firm. And then you can just pull your yarn up a little bit and snip it. Now you need sharp scissors because you want to snip it close to your work, but of course not so close that you cut one of the stitches. That's a no-no. So you need to be very careful. And then from then on, when you're sewing in the other tails, you don't need to pull it so tightly. So I'm going to just, for my second hint of silver tail, I'm just weaving it down through the stitches at the back, and then I'm going to weave it back up and I'm just going to leave this one done twice because this is really firm and I think this will hold, and I'm going to cut it. And the only rule of thumb for sewing in tails is to try, if you can, if you've got a colour of one tail, this case it's the duck egg, that you sew it in in the area where that duck egg has been used, so that your tail will blend in color wise with the crochet. So I'm weaving that in and picking it up and coming back. This isn't quite so tight, this area, as the center, so I'm going to go backwards or go back up again for a third time, and that's nicely woven in. So that's all you need to do. You can go round and do them all once, twice, 3 times if you feel you need it, and I recommend that. And once all your tails are trimmed and cut, it will look like this. So then you just need to go ahead and make the other 8 squares for this center section 1. And then the next video, as I said, will be the continuous join as you go tutorial to join these squares together. And the one thing I will say is that tutorial was made when I was using very slightly different colours for this pattern. So it didn't seem necessary to redo the whole video for this version of the pattern, but just be aware that the colours will look a little bit different, but the whole process is exactly the same. And you can watch that video, then you can move on and start section 2, which involves the next 9 squares, and I'm just going to bring them in to let you see. It's not 9 squares, of course, because we have had to, we're going round the outside of the 3 by 3, so there are more squares for this outer section. But you can see I've done them all here. They're all neatly finished off and they are in order for joining. And the third video that you will see is how to attach those to the center 9, and that again is a slightly different colorway because it's an older video. And then I will be back to show you how to start section 3, which is the granny stripes, immediately after section 2. So enjoy making your granny squares. It's great fun when there are lots of different colors to work with, and I will see you when you have your center 9 and then the next round all attached neatly and ready to move on to section 3. So bye for now.